Welcome back for part 2 of how to reupholster your dining room chair. In this video, we will be tackling repairs and reconstruction. As you can see here in my dining room chair, I've got some cracks in the wood frame. There's two specific areas on the chair back. The wood and the frame is still in great condition, but it's obviously very wobbly. And so what I did was I grabbed some of this wood glue and I sort of squished it in to the nooks and crannies the best that I could. What I'm using here is a sharpened wooden dowel. It's actually probably like a bamboo skewer, something you would use to make kebabs on the grill, but it was perfect for trying to smush the glue into these real tight spaces. Once I felt like I had enough glue in every little nook and cranny that I possibly could, I then wiped off any sort of drips and sort of overspill that I had here. Next up, it was going to be time to clamp the chair together to basically make sure everything stayed really nice and tight so that I could let the glue dry overnight. And I have to admit, I had quite the difficult time trying to get the clamp for the back piece of the chair, that sort of top part there that really needed to stay squished together. Because of the round back on the chair, I just could not get this clamp to work. I can't tell you how many times I tried, and every time I got it to a point I thought was perfect, it would slide off. I finally had to resolve to just using duct tape, but interestingly enough, it worked. Next up, I wanted to create a stencil of the base of the chair, the actual chair seat. If you recall, the sort of bands that were on the bottom of the seat of the chair were in really rough shape, and so I had to get rid of those. And I thought instead of replacing those woven pieces, those bands, that it would be a better idea to actually create a wooden base for the chairs. I just thought it would be more solid and hold up better over time. So here, what I'm doing is I'm using a brown paper grocery bag as the material for creating a type of stencil. Here you can see the stencil is completed and I'm going to set it aside for now, but in a little bit I will start to use it to cut out the base of this chair out of plywood. Next up, I wanted to tackle sanding and refinishing this chair with new stain. But you can see here there's tons of little holes from all of those staples that I had pulled out earlier. And the chair itself, the wood frame, it's in excellent, very sturdy condition, but it was definitely roughed up. It had been banged up over the years, and I think I also just banged it up a little bit as I was removing all of those staples and nails that were in it. So here you can see I'm using my sander along the main pieces of the chair. I'm trying to avoid all of that detail work. And really the reason for this is that this sander is amazing, but if you use it too much on the detail work, it will buff out that detail. And I didn't want to do that. And I'm using a 225 grit sandpaper here, which I thought was the perfect grit for this particular project, for the larger pieces. Now for the more detailed work, I have this really amazing hand sponge sander by 3M. It really is great for getting around all those little dowel pieces and the spool work, all the little details. And you can see here I'm using this sponge sander to get into all those little grooves, all the little nooks and crannies. And the thing is with this particular piece of furniture, yes, the larger areas did need to have that 225 grit sandpaper to really smooth things out, but the legs of the chair were in excellent condition. So really the reason why I'm sanding this piece here in this fashion is to just rough up the finish so that the new stain will adhere better. And here I'm giving it a really good wipe down after I was done sanding, because next up is going to be adding the stain, and you really want to make sure you don't have a ton of sawdust all over your chair. But before we start staining, we are going to use a sander deglosser. This is great for removing any dirt and residue that was left on the chair. And next up, we are going to start staining. Here I'm using Early American by Minwax. These chairs originally had a bit of a yellow tone to them, almost kind of like a cream look, and then it had a whitewash over the top. I didn't mind the whitewash, and you'll see when this project is finished, some of that whitewash still shows through, which I actually really, really liked. But I did want to go with a different tone for these chairs, and I really just love this Early American color. I feel like it goes with a lot of different decor, and it's just a really good classic look. You'll see here I'm wearing gloves, and I'm also wearing my dust mask still. Unfortunately, I don't think I realized that I still had it on. A little bit later in the project, you'll see that I switch over to having a proper ventilating mask for this portion of the project to keep those fumes out. I also decided to just use a rag to apply the stain. You can certainly use a brush or even a sponge brush to apply it, but knowing that I wasn't going to be too concerned about brush strokes or anything like that, I really thought it was going to be easiest to just use this rag. And the finish turned out great, so I'm glad I went with this technique. Once I was fully done staining the chair, I let it sit for about 5 minutes before I came back in with a clean cloth and wiped off any excess stain that was still on the chair. Once you're done with this step, you're going to want to let your chairs dry overnight. Sometimes I will even let mine dry for 2 nights if it's really humid. You want to make sure that all of the stain is completely dry and it is not tacky before you go on to the next step. Here you can see I remembered to wear the correct mask this time. This next step is applying the polyacrylic clear coat. This is going to give your piece a really nice protective finish. Here I'm making sure to get into all of that detailed work, all those nooks and crannies. You really want to make sure you get everything coated nicely. When this step is done, again, you are going to want to let your chairs dry overnight, sometimes 2 nights if it still feels a little bit tacky. You'll want it to be completely dry. Finally, we are going to start cutting those new bases for the chairs. So here is that stencil that we created earlier out of the brown grocery bag. And I'm just taping it down here to keep it nice and secure. And now I am tracing the outline of the stencil, making the lines as dark as possible so that when I remove the stencil, I will still be able to see exactly where I'm supposed to be cutting. Before getting the saw out to cut this piece, I thought it'd be a good idea to drill the corners. I'll be using a jigsaw to actually cut the seat of the chair out, but that jigsaw is not going to be able to pivot a 90-degree or even tighter turn. And so that's where the drill holes come into play. It gives me a little bit more wiggle room, a little bit more space with that saw to be able to cut those corners. And here I'm using my jigsaw to cut out the piece. You can tell I'm struggling a little bit with the cord on this saw. I'm telling you, there is just something amazing about having battery operated, non-corded tools, but sometimes you work with what you got. It still did a great job. And you can see where I needed to have those drill holes so that I can get into those corners. And here I'm just checking the fit of the wood onto the chair, and I am super pleased that everything fit great. Next up, we are going to be applying new fabric. So you will find the link to that video in the description box below, or if you want to go back and watch the deconstruction video, I will have the link to that as well.